Welcome back to part 3 of this series on the Y-BAK3071. We're going to be switching Baker Hughes today, and then we'll take the liquid petroleum gas cars up the Lonestar Branch to PLS to do some switching there. We can see that we have a switching lead that's 4,665 feet long, even though on this map it looks like just a small section. All of these Galesburg, Balen, Kansas City, Kansas, etc. cars are outbound cars. They are not going to be needed to take down the Lonestar Branch. We're just going to leave these behind and pick them back up on the way back towards Bakersfield Yard. Here we found our BHS Baker Hughes cars. We're going to go ahead and get ready to set those out here. So we come to a stop so we can separate the train there. We go to look at where the separation is between the Baker Hughes cars and the cars that are heading down to the LPG terminal. And we're going to uncouple here. Apply some handbrakes so nothing rolls away once we've uncoupled. And we're good with the cut. Pulling them forward. Our conductor rides the rear of the train, and we'll be jumping off at the switch to throw the switch so we can put these BHS cars on a different track. And you can see the next car goes out to Richmond, California, not to be confused with Richmond, Virginia. So we're going to cut the train here, make sure we shut off the airflow, close the angle cock, apply some handbrakes to the Baker Hughes cars, which we're going to deal with later. There's a good brake, angle cock closed, hopping on the back of that car so that we can ride the cut out and then back into another track. So it's sort of like we're reblocking our train like we did back in Bakersfield Yard. When you think about it, we've got the cars going out to PLS, Plains LPG Services on our left there, tank cars, and then we're riding the back of cars that will go back to Bakersfield Yard, which we picked up on our way here. And finally on the third track, or the furthest back track, is just the cars that are headed for BHS, Baker Hughes Services. Hopping off, gonna throw that switch and get back on the rear of the train so that we're ready for the pushback. Taking a look at the OC, we note that we've got 12 loaded covered hoppers to pick up at BHS. These car tags that tell you where every car is going, they can be turned on or off by a key press in Run 8. So you don't have to always look at them if you don't like seeing that kind of thing. I like leaving them on for videos like this because it helps me to sort of explain what's going on. But if I were operating, I probably would only turn the tags on when I actually needed that information. Since we're going to be picking up cars first here at Baker Hughes, we're going to go ahead and tack them onto the end of these other hopper cars so that they are also stored with all of the other outbound cars. Because once we pick the cars up at Baker Hughes, they're outbound. Prototype engineers also like to reduce the number of moves, so even though shoving this big long cut of cars may seem like the least efficient way to go, it's not entirely correct. As long as we don't have to uncouple cars, move cars around, all that kind of thing, it's actually easier to shove this big cut back. And we're going to climb back on the back now that we've thrown the switch, get ready to ride the cut back and pick up the outbound cars that are sitting here waiting for us at Baker Hughes. Taking a look at the dispatcher display, we see that there's a couple of other trains near us, but none of those are going to bother us because we are completely off the main line. I just took a look just as a reference, see what's going on. You can tell these are all outbound cars because they're tagged with RIC for Richmond, STO for Stockton. In other words, they're not tagged for BHS, Baker Hughes Services, which is the industrial spur we're working right now. Hopping off and making sure we have a good join, we tell our engineer 1/2 a car to the join. Continuing to push back, and bang, it's a good join. We will save our spot here, walk to the back of the train, and make sure that the angle cock at the rear is closed. Remember, we don't want to add air to this train yet, and it's open. If we would have started opening up the angle cock and letting air in, it would have just simply exhausted right out the rear and caused the air pressure to drop so fast that the train would have fallen into emergency. We partially open the angle cock to make sure that we don't overload the system, and we're up to about 87, 88, 90. Quite a bit of airflow even with the partial open, but under 100, so we go up to fully open. You can also see it in the engineer cab. You can see the airflow there in the middle. We begin pulling on these cars, but they aren't budging, even in notch 2. It isn't until I go in and edit this that I notice that the brakes haven't completely released, which is why we need to pull so hard and put the sanders on. So, poor train handling on my part. We can see to the left on the main line is a train passing by, but again, we're completely off the main line, so no interference with us. Just only way we even know it's going by really is a little bit of a glimpse between our rail cars that are sitting there. We use our footage counter to guarantee that the entire cut of cars fits into this middle track. Ideally, we'd like to end up with the cars that are going back to Bakersfield sitting in this middle track, our Baker Hughes setouts on the right, so we can just set those out quickly, and then finally the PLS cars on the left all by themselves, so we can just grab them and run up the Lonestar Branch to do our switching at PLS. Making sure that our entire cut of cars clears the last switch so that we'll be able to shove those BHS cars back without fouling the switch. Now we're going to go ahead and leave those cars off in the middle track, set the handbrakes so they don't move on us. We'll disconnect from them and connect to the cars just to our left there, which are all going to BHS. We just cleared out the BHS tract, so we know that there's plenty of room to push those cars back. It'll be a simple move. Oopsie daisy, stopped a little bit early there. We will go ahead and pull her ahead about 1 engine length, as our conductor tells us to do, and as we pass this switch, come to a stop and throw the switch to connect those BHS cars. Three blasts to make sure our brakeman knows that we're beginning a reverse move. Close to a join, we slowed down for a good couple without any damage. We made a safety stop, get out, make sure we made the join. Looks good. Let's go ahead and air them up. We don't need to check these angle cocks because when we dropped the cars, we did close the rear angle cock. Our brakeman gets on the rear of the train to protect the shove as we move the cars back towards Baker Hughes Services, BHS. We can't see it right now, but if you listen carefully, you can hear another through freight charging through on the main line. The main line's pretty busy right now. It's a good thing we have this little yard to work in. Don't have to worry about clearing up the main every time we make a move. Off to the right, we catch a glimpse of that train. It's a grain train. Looks like a loaded grain train headed to Fresno. And he's making some pretty good time westbound on that main track. Coming to a stop so that we can line the turnout or switch for our movement. Those DPUs on the rear don't seem to be pushing very hard. I can barely hear them. I certainly heard the front end pulling pretty good. Hate to walk, so let's just get back on this cut of cars and ride it all the way back to Baker Hughes.
User joined your channel.
We notice that these box cars are also outbound, but the OC switch list did not call for us to pick those up on this particular train. We couple up to these cars just in case the next train that needs to make a pickup has to pick all of them up. Just want to make it easier for the next job. We've uncoupled, close the angle cock, and pull away from that train. All of our work is done now here at BHS, and it's time to connect to the LPG cars and take them to the Plains LPG Services, PLS. We even use our distance counter to make sure that we are past that switch before we stop and back onto the waiting cars that we're going to take down to PLS.
User disconnected from your channel.
Looks like the main line's pretty quiet right now, so maybe we'll get lucky and be able to get some time from the dispatcher to cross over and head up the Lonestar Branch. Four miles an hour, getting closer to our cars. Want to make the join below 3 miles an hour if we can. Looks like we're going to get there. And there we go. Perfect for a join. One horn blast means that we are set and centered. So safe for the conductor or brakeman to go in between the locomotive and the cars. Confirming that we have our EOT device on the back of this train, and also that the angle cock is closed before we start to pull on the train. And so much for that clear main line. Here comes a container train, stack train as they call them, heading eastbound on the main line. So we're not even going to bother the dispatcher until we see he's clear. Also, we still need to pump up our air brakes. In the background, we just heard the detector triggered by the stack train that just came by. Making sure our switch is lined for our movement. And we're going to pull on them. Make sure we do have a hold of our train. And then we're going to get closer to the main line before we reach out to the dispatcher for authority to occupy the main. We apply the brakes so we can stop short of the main line, since we can't enter that without getting dispatcher authority.
Dispatch over.
Yeah, dispatch, this is the ATSF 5698 West on the point of the Y-BAK3071. Looking for authority to enter the main line between CP Una West and East Shafter, just to cross over and then immediately leave your railroad again. Over.
Copy that. Can you repeat your engine number one more time? Over.
The locomotive number is ATSF 5698 West. Over.
Alright, ATSF 5698. Got my permission to enter the main track between West Una and the East EST and the Shafter at 11:44 hours to cross on over to Lone Star. Over.
Understood. The ATSF 5698 does have authority to enter the main track between East Shafter and West Una in order to cross over to Lone Star.
That's correct.
5698 out. Well, I started my grade crossing horn sequence a little early. Gonna have to repeat it. Starting the counter so I can know when my train is completely clear of the main line. I've driven between Bakersfield and Fresno, and I have to tell you, this is just how it looks. You drive through lots and lots of orchards. Quite a few of our fruit and pecans, etc., come from the Central Valley in California. Notice the extra siding up ahead on our left. We could have dropped our outbound cars there, and that would have prevented us from having to get back into that little yard by Baker Hughes, but this siding is only 1,975 feet long, and we had a little more than that we had to take back with us, so it just didn't make any sense to use this siding. The map shows all the siding lengths, so you can plan these things ahead. Now that the train is completely clear of the main line, we'll go ahead and normal those switches so that the dispatcher can use the track once again for mainline movement. There we are, all clear. So we'll stop the train down, let our brakeman get back on the train, and contact our dispatcher.
Dispatch over.
Dispatcher, ATSF 5698 West, like to report we have cleared the main line and all switches hand operated between east EAST Shafter and west of EST Una are now lined and locked for normal mainline movement. Over.
Copy that. All hand goes between east EAST Shafter and west of EST Una on the main track are lined and locked for mainline movement at 11:50. That's 115 knot hours. Over.
That is correct. Thank you, dispatcher. We'll let you know when we need to get back on the railroad.
Copy that. Dispatch is out.
I took a little artistic license here and went ahead and sped the video up and edited out some of the run down this branch line just because it's running between trees the whole way and there's just not a whole lot to see. Running up the Lonestar Branch, and you can see we're going to run all the way up the branch until we get to Plains LPG Services. We don't have any work to do at Premier Silica. We take a look ahead to make sure that the switches are lined for our movement. Since we're no longer on dispatcher-controlled CTC trackage, we have to rely on the previous crew to have lined the switches for normal movement. Typically, that's required, but you never know, somebody may have forgotten to line them back. If they're green, they're in the normal position, meaning you'll travel straight. If they're red, diverging, you'll take the alternate path. We decide to stop before the grade crossing so we can check the situation ahead without holding up traffic. Here's an overhead view, a map from the OC, of the layout of the Plains LPG Services plant. The cars are not really in those positions, so now we take an overhead view to see where the rail cars are actually sitting. The cars that you see ahead are all filled, loaded with LPG, ready for us to haul back to Bakersfield. The cars we are carrying with us are empties. We'll drop them here at the plant, and later a local plant switcher will get those loaded, one group at a time. Taking a look at the OC, which tells us how many empties are pending and how many loads are ready, and it shows that all of the loads are ready for us to pick up. Having checked that and confirming that there is a place for our train to go and hopefully clear that road crossing, we begin to move forward and start our work. A couple of sounds of the horn and the bell just indicate the train is starting to move. Brakes are completely released. The little beep was the sound of the end of train device telling us that the last rail car is moving. And we begin our grade crossing sequence. Like we did before, we started out just a little bit early, so we had to go through the sequence again. 2 longs, a short, and a long are the required signaling before crossing a grade crossing. We slow up so that we can confirm the position of the switches as we pull into this industrial plant. Switchman on the ground. Looks like the first switch is lined for our movement. It's thrown red, meaning that it will allow us to pull onto that track. And we're going to want to put our train in these receiving tracks here. So we want to make sure that it's lined to an empty track, which it is. Hop on board, and away we go. Switchman will stay on the front here, so that he can check other switches up ahead. In reality, another switchman or the conductor would get off here so that as the rear of the train passes, that person can throw the switches and protect our reverse move as we back into the storage tracks where we're going to drop our train. It appears that the turnouts are lined to take us into the plant, and we should have plenty of headroom. The switch up ahead is not thrown for our movement. It's thrown for a diverging route, and we would foul that switch if we moved forward. So we need to get off to the front and throw that switch for normal or straight through movement. While doing it, the switchman runs ahead to throw other switches in our path, and the engineer in the meantime pulls forward on the direction of the switchman via his radio or hand signals. We're using our counter to make sure that we have pulled fully into this plant. We've still got 1,500 feet to go, and I'm not certain that the entire train is going to fit before we get to the end of this track. Looks like I failed this math test today. We are going to stop short before the entire train fits, unfortunately. Our brakeman, who got off at the rear of the train, tells me that the good news is our train has cleared the grade crossing so traffic can move. However, it has not cleared the switch into the receiving yard or storage tracks. So we cannot start pushing these cars right into those storage tracks. Instead, we're going to need to push them a little further towards the grade crossing and then push the bulk of the cars into one of the storage tracks. Taking off the EOT device, since we're going to be dropping these cars off, we don't want to leave our FRED or our EOT device behind. Putting on some handbrakes, because the last thing we want to have happen is for these cars to roll into traffic. Uncoupled. We hopefully now have enough feet ahead of ourselves to get that one car past the switch and start to push back into the storage tracks. Still a lot of airflow, but the brakes are showing released. Our brakeman on the rear informs us that we have successfully uncoupled, and now he watches the rear car to make sure that it has in fact passed that switch. A little tough to do as a one-man crew, so if we really did have two people, I would have that other person on his version of Run 8 actually sitting back there and watching, instead of me having to flip between both positions. We're just going to guess here. Pull in as far as we can and hope for the best. And we made it. We breathe a sigh of relief, throw that switch to start the path into the receiving or storage yard. You wouldn't be wrong to say that was poor planning on my part. I should have figured out the length of those and the length of the cars I was going to set out and done this a little more proactively. But see, you know I'm doing these things live. I don't put this together ahead of time or anything like that. I'm on a live multiplayer server. Other people are running at the same time I am, and I'm just running it the way I'm running it, just like if I were working for the real railroad. And I don't know about this, but I sort of make mistakes in my job sometimes, so I got to figure real railroaders make some mistakes on theirs as well. Anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. For some reason, the crossing gates have been activated anyway. That's a malfunction. We should probably call the maintainer because we're not fouling that track. Nevertheless, the bell is annoying and we're going to ignore it.
BNSF 7717 to dispatch.
Dispatch over.
7717 is all stop at Ibis crossover behind 7 other trains on Main 1.
Copy that. Yeah, it's a traffic jam back there. Where are you looking to tie down over?
I can tie down here. The OC says to go to Seligman and delete.
Stand by.
We come to a stop and start applying the handbrakes so that, again, none of these cars roll. We decide we're going to brake the train here and begin to put the remainder of the cars in another track. We need to push back a little bit for a pin because, as you can see from the yellow open coupler, there was too much tension on the pin and we couldn't uncouple, but it's fixed now. Climbing on board the rear car, asking our engineer to take them ahead. We now have plenty of headroom since we just dropped off quite a few cars on that storage track. Just past the switch, we get off the train and throw the switch so we can connect back onto the cars that are sitting there just short of the grade crossing. We tell the engineer 2 cars to the join. Looks like 1 car now. Half a car. 20 feet. Looks like we came to a stop just a little early, but that's okay. Give it a little more throttle and there we go. We have a good join. Hopping on the rear of the train so that we can guide the engineer as we pull forward. We need to let him know when we get past that switch so we can begin to back into one of the storage tracks. The locomotive you see in the background there is the plant switcher, dedicated to the PLS plant. That job takes the cars out of the storage tracks, brings them to the loading tracks, and then after they've been loaded, places them in the outbound tracks. Our conductor has lined the train into an empty track, told the engineer to go ahead and shove them on back. the engineer's view of the whole operation. Hard to really tell what's going on, and that's why you really have to rely on a switchman or conductor riding on the rear of the train and at other crucial locations along the route. We update the OC to indicate that we have in fact delivered the 43 empty tank cars to PLS. Well, that completes part 3. When we come back, we'll pick up all of the loaded LPG cars here in this plant, drag them up the branch line, and begin our return to Bakersfield.